Welcome back to the Social Work Race. Today, this show is entitled Trapped as a Child. This will be an interesting one. First of all, I want to welcome you to the show again. Thank you for sharing this podcast. My assumption is that you found it interesting to share with others. This is designed for social workers and those on the front line. Anybody on the front line of social care, social services in any form. Welcome, from the student to the most educated or experienced. Welcome. Again, please share, please subscribe. I want to play you a video. I hope that you will understand this man through his accent. Listen to this, because this will really open up the topic.
She might be 93 years, but she might still be free. For some trauma that she went through. And then she's still trapped in that trauma and have never grown. So many people you see here, they might be whatever age, they're still probably 7, 9, 11. Most of the grown-ups you see are children, They're trapped in that space where they were traumatized and they've never grown from there. Never. And they get gray and old and everything, and they're still 5. So all the actions, how they live their life, everything is like a baby. So be honest and be truthful and just tell people how it is, man. Tell people how it is. Express yourself.
Wow. So check that out. This is a very insightful man. It looks like I think he's from Grenada. And it's part of a documentary that I've been looking for but cannot find. A very interesting commentary. A very insightful man who is able to observe many people in his community and see how trauma has impacted their mental health, how they've navigated life and how they've coped with trauma. And so the aim of this particular podcast is to get you to think about how others are experiencing trauma or how they are playing it out. And I've entitled this one, of course, Trapped as a Child, because many people in the world, in society, through events have been locked in to the moment they experienced their first trauma. And if that happened at 5, 10, 15 years old, that's what it is. Many people have been locked in. So I want to read just a couple of articles. Mind-balance.org has got an interesting article. I wish I could read through all of these, but I might bore you. And the title of that articles is How Trauma Traps Us in a Time Capsule. Many of our intense emotional reactions to triggers in our now result from triggers that have formed in our past. People will sometimes say they felt like they were acting like a child, but somehow they couldn't help themselves. Others say that the feelings came in so quickly and so loudly that they reacted with too much anger or fear and said or did things they regretted afterward. So, this is the thing. I've just read a paragraph from the article. And I remember in my early days in social care, before I even did anything in education, I was running on intuition, which isn't always the best thing, has its place. And what I would do is I would make assumptions on the behaviors that I saw from others. And that wasn't very clever, because it meant that I drew my own conclusions without really being informed as to why people do what they do. And when I was working with young people way back, I'd be real frustrated with them because I couldn't make sense. I didn't want to make sense of their behavior. I wanted to be angry with it, without realizing that a lot of what I was seeing was their cycle of behavior, their time. It's like the time stone on the Infinity Gauntlet from the Avengers. It's like you're locked in a loop of time. You're locked in a loop of behaviors. And that's the trap. That is the trap. Let me read further. Imagine trauma like this. When we experience trauma, our feelings from that moment get frozen in a trauma time capsule. This time capsule is occasionally switched on by associated triggers in our current reality. It opens up, sucks us back into the past. I know this is me. Sucks us back into the past, and we respond the way we felt back then. Intense fear, intense anger, intense sadness, intense panic. We fight or run for our lives. And at that moment, our inner child is at the controls, and they are trying their best to survive. Have you ever seen a child? Like, I remember my youngest, I've got 2 adopted brothers, and I remember they wanted to play my PlayStation. It was a PlayStation 1 at the time. Obviously, this is a long time ago now, so don't laugh. The PlayStation 1, and they wanted to play it, and I'm like, well, you're like 4 or 5 years old, you can't play this game. And they took the controls, and they'd be playing away, thinking that they were doing a really good job. Really, they had no idea what they were doing. All they knew at the time was that they just had to push those buttons erratically. And what they were seeing in front of them, they felt that was a result of their informed actions. But they could not tell me what any button on a control pad was doing. And that's an example of a child at the controls. They think they're doing a good job, but they have no idea. And that's interesting because that's what many adults do. There is a child inside at the controls. And that's why that first audio that I played you resonated with me. He articulated that so well. There are people around, if you look around and look at some of the behaviors that we see, it's a child. Even if they're 80 or 90 years old, it's still a child in there. And how that plays out, that plays out with sometimes very destructive behavior. The fastest means to cope. And that comes through loss, pain, detachment. We have something called separation trauma. That's when children are separated from their families. Even if the families that they're coming from are far too abusive for the child will still experience a level of trauma. That day they never forget, when they were being driven away by a social worker or the police. The day that when they were ripped out the arms of their parent. They will never forget. And it's not just about what they remember. It's the impact on their emotions and how they choose to cope with those emotions. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of care unless we have to. Another article here from ZachRawlings.com. The 3 ways trauma traps you. In a past blog, he says, I discussed 3 primary ways trauma can affect someone. Building on that, this blog will expand that explanation and understanding of trauma to include the negative cycles it creates and not just its short-term effects. Trauma is far-reaching and cyclical. So it's important to take some time to understand these cycles and how difficult it can be to escape them. The first cycle of trauma is one of self-abuse. Yep, I won't read it all. Secondly, trauma creates a cycle of poverty. Wow, should I touch on that? Wow, it does. Yeah, okay. So he's saying here that he says he teaches human development classes to undergraduate students, and they often discuss how poverty makes humans vulnerable, and it stunts your development. But many people do not understand the extensive role that trauma plays in an economical sense. And he says, consider these findings from a recent report from the CDC, Center of Disease Control and Prevention. He says the average cost for someone who experienced abuse, this is in the US now, is $210,000 over the course of their life. Wow. Someone who was abused as a child on average earns $5,890 less per year than someone who was not mistreated as a child. And then it also says rises in unemployment are almost always followed by rises in maltreatment cases. Wow. And then it says finally, trauma creates a generational cycle which is passed down through the generations. And I guess when a parent is traumatized, say a mum has been sexually abused in some way, her apprehensions and her responses to maybe men or sex or relationships, the children will see it, and she may well teach it. She may well teach the children how to be in this situation. Again, a child is now teaching a child how to respond to things that are natural. But I guess the child is fearful. And there's a reason why we're going into all of this. There's a reason why we're going into all of this. I'm going to play you another audio, just to explore a little bit more about the whole. Well, it's actually looking at your emotional age. Someone I kind of follow on TikTok. Check this out.
It has been said, and I believe this to be true. Okay, I have believed this to be true, that we are the emotional age where we were hurt worse. See, some of us are like, I'm 48, I'm grown. But how old are you emotionally? See, some of us stopped moving at 12 when our parents divorced. Some of us stopped moving at 7 when we were molested. Some of us stopped moving. And emotionally, we're unavailable. Emotionally, we're damaged. Emotionally, but we don't take account.
Yeah, you heard that. And I want you to just look at this in an abstract way. Maybe you haven't been traumatized. Maybe you haven't. I want you to look at this in an abstract way. Take yourself out of the situation and just imagine how you'd respond, or what you see from others when you see self-destructive behavior. One of the things that we're working with young people is a lot. The vast majority of them are just that we're working with in our department is the use of cannabis. Why are they using this substance? Why is it becoming so common? What is it that they are running from? What is it that they're using it for? What are they trying to cover up? What are they struggling with? I remember working with a young lady, I think I might have mentioned it before, years ago, who just told me, I cannot sleep without smoking weed, because if I don't use weed before I go to bed, I remember all the sexual abuse my mum's boyfriend used to inflict on me. And she said, I will wake up screaming at night. And so this is it. The self-destructive behaviors, sometimes we're trying to pull the lollipop out of their mouth. We're trying to get them to change their ways. We want them to stop because it's bad for your health. And I don't know if the systems are in place. I really don't think the systems are in place to really deal with why. We can deal with the what. Even young people who they've committed an offence and they sentenced in court, and a part of their referral order or their rehabilitation order is to work with a substance misuse worker. That will usually be the case if they are using cannabis or anything Class A, anything else. But what their order does not contain is the need to deal with the reasons why. And so we can always talk about it as youth offending workers or as social workers, but is there a system in place to ask those questions and manage and support them? And I don't think there is. You look at something like CAMS, the Children and Adults Mental Health Service, and you're like, there's a waiting list of like a year, 2 years. So the system isn't there. And it is a situation that we are in. This is a dilemma because we are then required to help the young person to reduce the risks. But if we stop them from using cannabis, what would they then migrate to? If they haven't dealt with the trauma, dealt with the issues, the experience, being able to verbalize it, you know? And so, and even as adults, actually, as adults, we have to ask ourselves, as we are, as professionals, assessing, whether it be another adult or a child or a family, if we are assessing them, have we asked ourselves the question, what's my emotional age? What am I hiding behind? I think that there are some socially acceptable management systems, coping mechanisms, where some of us will, drink a bottle of wine every 2 to 3 days because it's socially acceptable. Is that a coping mechanism for something that we've got going on in the background? Is there a program in the background running in our lives? Or is there a child at the controls? The child will say, I'm bored. You know what young children do a lot of the time, especially the westernized children, you know what they'll do a lot of the time when they're bored, they want to eat. And you carry that into your future, that habit. When you're bored, you just eat. Let's have a snack. So, us as adults, us as professionals, we as professionals and assessors who determine so much for a child and a family and an adult or those in need, should really look at ourselves first. And I think that will also help us to write our assessments a lot better, or more in depth, with more consideration maybe, to understand then the cycles that those that we are supporting are in. Social workers will always need to, when they're making assessments, they will always need to look at the cause as far as possible, and they'll look at it through theory, a theoretical perspective, and they'll look at the cause. Maybe if the service user is really kind of engaging well, then we can draw, this is what my mum did to me, this is what my dad did to me, this is what I went through, I was in care, this is what someone did to me, that will inform, and you can draw a number of conclusions and say, it looks like that has impacted how this young person is thinking and feeling and why they're doing what they're doing. As for me, I like to, as far as the young person will go, I will take them through and help them understand the cycle that they're in and why they're doing it. Doesn't always work, but when I'm writing my assessments, this will always be in there. And if it's missing, it's like you haven't asked the questions. Now, it's one thing if you haven't asked. There's another thing if they haven't told you or they don't want to tell you. But it's another thing when you haven't even asked. When asked about why they were so angry, why they are doing what they're doing, what was their response? Did you ask? When we're writing our assessments, and this is really the main point of this particular episode, when you're writing your assessments, we are learning also about ourselves, but we're also writing these assessments to help other professionals understand who we are working with. And we're also hoping that one day, and this is something I've learned recently, to allow the young person, should they want to know what was written about them, to understand their history. So these assessments are also for the young person to read to themselves one day. Yeah. When we write these assessments based on this information, then we make a plan in response to what we understand and to speculate and to improve their chances of managing the impact of their decisions and dysfunction and the chaos that their trauma can cause. I really appreciate working in this field, and as a social worker, working with some of the most challenging, I guess, in some ways, the most challenging type of, I say client, can I use that term? I think it's humbling because they're actually more teaching me about myself. And I guess I appreciate the people I'm working with a lot more. I'm working for the people I'm working for. I appreciate them all the more because they're helping me understand the world that I'm living in. They're helping me understand me, my triggers, my behavior, and helping me to use language that is more forgiving. Because in my early days, as I mentioned, I didn't have a clue. So that's why I really want to try and take care of myself. And I hope that you will take care of yourselves too. Oh, by the way, I want to leave you with a very short audio clip from my friend Andrew Fuller Hood Lessons on TikTok. Go get his page, go subscribe, go follow that page. He summarizes nicely what we're dealing with here. And hopefully this will help inform you in practice in your experiences with people on the front line as to how to approach and how to consider before we act, how to support someone or to make sense of someone when you find that they have maybe destructive behaviors, cycles. This might give you some insight.
Yo, family, wagwan. Listen, trauma. I need you guys to get this, you know. Trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is not what happens to you. Listen, trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. A lot of us stay in incident mode and event mode. What happened to me mode. You're going to waste your time there. It's tear jerking. It's emotional. It jerks your feelings. Listen, I validate that. That is serious. There's a part where that sits. But listen, the real issue is not what happened to you. It's what's happening inside of you. What's broken you? What's messed you up? Let's be solution focused. So listen, trauma, let's go again. It's not what happened to you, it's what happens inside of you.